A visit to Hong Kong puts a lie to the story of diversity. We're often told today that diversity is our strength. It's become both a rallying cry and a mockery. But when we look at countries with less diversity, do we see a worse state? So I've spent quite a bit of time in Eastern Europe, and I think of the Czech Republic, where there's plenty of foreigners, there's plenty of tourists, there's plenty of business. Do I see crime rampant society? Problems of rampant aggression, bad behaviour? I would say no. I look at Poland. I've been in small towns where there's real poverty. People who don't have much. But they've spent decades being put down by Russians and communism. And they do struggle. But do I see open crime? Do I feel at risk of getting accosted by people who want to take advantage of, let's call it in air quotes, the rich foreigner? No. I might see someone who wants to talk to someone who's different. I'd see a genuine interest. When I turn on my television, do I see only white Polish people? No, in fact, quite the reverse. They're heavily overrepresenting non-white Polish because they're exotic, they're interesting. What I observed is that when you have very few ethnic minorities, there isn't rampant racism and hate towards people on the basis of their colour. I'd say racism is almost born out of there being a lot of people, not a few. You don't blame people for your problems until there's enough people to blame. I've travelled through Hungary. Hungary's often put up as a bogeyman, an example where they voted for Orban. He's evil, he's racist, he's terrible. Well, I see a peaceful country. I see a country where I don't agree with all their policies, but I feel safe on the streets. Now, last year, I had the opportunity to travel to Hong Kong. I had a stopover, and I thought I'd extend it and see a bit of the city. Well, what a city! It's splendid. Amazing blend of Britain and China. The signs are in English and Chinese. The people mainly speak Chinese with a bit of English, and obviously some speak it well. But I'd say you'll find it easier to speak to someone on a high street in Norway than in Hong Kong. As I walked through Hong Kong, did I ever feel unsafe? No. The people told me they send their children to school by themselves in the morning, over a fair distance. Well, when I wandered around at night, did I feel in danger? No. I'd say in the night markets, some of the traders are particularly aggressive and pushy, and they definitely want your money, and they're rather upset if you leave without giving them some of it. But did I at any point think, does that person have a knife? Do I want to avoid them because they're going to be aggressive? Did I witness any crime? No. I wandered around, spent 2 days hiking around the city of Hong Kong, visiting the main islands, visiting the attractions. Did I see pickpocketing? No, I didn't see any form of crime. So you could say, well, because a lot of police. I didn't see that many police. You could say it's because they're scared the Chinese are a bit more, well, I think if they stood up and called for democracy, there might be more challenge. But if you go around your everyday life, did I see strong-handedness? No. What I actually saw was a blend of Britain from the 1990s with China, a respectful blend of those cultures. And when I say Britain in the 1990s, I mean things we've largely forgotten. Manners, politeness, not getting in other people's way, considering others. I didn't see people sitting on a bus playing music on their phone at 100% just to make sure that everyone can hear the rap they're playing. No. I didn't see spitting. I didn't see people dropping gum. I didn't see anyone urinate in the street. I see that in London on a regular basis. I returned to London and I saw dirt. I saw mess. I saw dropped candy wrappers, Coke bottles thrown near a bin. I strolled through a park and I saw piles where people had eaten a picnic. They'd had a McDonald's or a KFC, and instead of carrying it 10 feet to the nearest bin, which was perfectly open and loads of capacity, they just left them on the floor, stood up and walked away. Well, I saw gum riddled back to the bus seat on my way home from the airport. It's the little things that I believe 30 years ago your mother would have said, don't do that, think what would happen to someone else. Well, London has lost that. London's always been a little different to the rest of the UK. I remember trying to explain to a friend from school who said, well, everyone's so unfriendly in London. And I explained, it's not really that everyone's unfriendly, it's that there are so many people that when you're on the train, if someone talks to you, they're probably a bit odd. You just don't want to speak to some total stranger. They're not cold and unfriendly. They just get on with their lives without other people butting into them. But for some time in London, I've seen a contempt for other people. I'm doing whatever I want to do, and I don't care if there's someone else it impacts. I walk the streets of London, I see bedsteads, I see mattresses, fridges dumped on street corners. Now, a lot of that is down to the councils charging so much for collection, but it's far cheaper to just leave it on a street corner. It's also down to the fact there are so many people living in houses that the refuse collection just isn't able to cope. There's more refuse, there's no more bins, there's a lot more people. Through fractured societies, fractured communities, there are groups who do not understand or respect each other, and they live in small ghettos next to each other. A street on one side where nearly everyone is Afghani juts into a street where nearly everyone is Hindu further down. And they don't mix. But still clusters of community who speak the same language, interact with each other, don't interact with anyone outside of their community, and some of these groups frankly have advantages. A friend of mine lived in a housing association, part rent, part buy, block of flats, and there was a gate. And the gate was paid for by the people living in the part buy, part rent flats. But they weren't allowed to park cars because if they did, that would be encouraging people to have cars. So the council doesn't allow them to have cars. But on the other side of that road was 5-bed townhouses for people with subsidised rental. So these people who can't afford to rent are given subsidised rent. That's a great scheme. They're allowed to park, so they can have a car. And you walk down that road, there's Mercedes, Jaguars, BMWs, the nice Skoda Yeti, Tesla. But how come they're allowed to park when they can't afford to rent? and they have the code to the gate. So I delivered something to my friend, and he couldn't open the gate because it's only for the one side of the road. In fact, there's a camera to catch anyone parking from the other side of the road. So you have a community, let's call it, it's a fancy new word. You have a group of housing where the people who are parked by a park ramp pay for the gate. But the people who are too poor to rent get to open the gate and park their fancy cars there. Well, guess whose children used to sit on the gate and break it? And then guess who paid for it? They were confused when my friend said to them, "Don't break the gate." They said, "It's not your gate, it's the council." Yet my friend paid for that gate. He just couldn't use it. When you have these sort of rules and you have these inequities, it does not breed community cohesion. But when governments talk of community cohesion and inequities, that's not what they mean. They mean that the people on the other side pay tax and have a job. Returning from Hong Kong, that terrible ethno-state where everyone's mostly one nationality, I met with my friend for a drink, and he was asking me about the holiday, and I said it was lovely. I said, Hong Kong, no sign of crime there. Really reminded me of the old days in London. He told me about his child coming home from school and saying they'd witnessed a murder. When they questioned it, they hadn't seen a murder. What they'd seen was a man arguing with a woman at like 4 in the afternoon. But he wasn't peacefully arguing. He was banging and smashing her head against the shop window, screaming abuse at her. And his child was scared, understandably. And my friend said to him, "What happened? Did the police come?" "Oh," he said, "the police were watching." So yes, the police did come, but a boy on his way home from school saw a woman so brutally attacked that he thought she was being murdered, while the police stood and decided what was the best course of action. This is the London I recognise today. The London where teenagers are killed on the street with knives. I don't want to be sensationalist. There's plenty of things about London that haven't changed much. But as I walk through North London, say Colindale, I see 10 to 14 floor buildings rolling into the distance at sunset. The sun sets earlier there because you're walking through canyons between monstrous tower blocks so far as the eye can see. An area of London completely covered in flats, and all of those flats are big. And they do house a lot of people. And I'm talking about Hong Kong as a comparison. You could say they have very tall buildings, and they sure do. But they didn't look like vertical ghettos. I used to go to the Oriental Market there. It was a lovely Asian supermarket. And I wouldn't say the area was well-to-do. The surrounding area was a bit down at heel. Well, now it's all plush and polished bricks and stylised balconies. It's better. Do I think there's any community there? No. When I was at university, we were knocking down tower blocks because we realised that the UK's social housing, rising to the sky, whilst efficient on space, created vertical ghettos. Now we're embracing it all over again. Everything comes full circle, but I struggle to see what has improved in London. Now, a few weeks ago, I commented on the knighthood for Sadiq Khan, and fair to say, he wasn't a very popular character in the comments. It's not just Sadiq Khan that this decline in London's responsible for. London's been in a spiral since I've been here, but every year it gets less and less welcoming, more and more dirty, and more lower quality of life. They say diversity is our strength. I'd say London is more diverse than when I arrived. There were large Irish communities, large Hindu community, well established. They were respectful of each other. They overlapped and they interacted. However, in 30 years, pretty much all of those people in my street have left. They've moved out of North London. The Irish, as the older retired and the businesses they worked in closed, when they realised they could sell their house and move somewhere cheaper, or just move back to Ireland. So I know plenty of people who moved back to Ireland, and I know several who sold their terraced house in London, moved down to the coast and bought 2 small houses and gave one to their child. They fled London and provided a better quality of life for their children and their grandchildren, all at the same time releasing capital for a bit of retirement. The Indian families I knew, well, some of them are still here, but most of them moved out. They moved in what was called the brown flight. One time they moved out and they rented their original homes. And I do think house prices have driven a lot of the problem. People have left because they can have such a better life abroad. We're always told that the Eastern Europeans left because of Brexit. Oh, the evils of Brexit, all that racism, they had to go home. Well, I know several Poles who went home not because of Brexit, not because of racism, but because they realised they were renting a house and they'd never be able to buy it. They were in that trap and they'd never be able to leave. Whereas they could save that money, go back to Poland, buy 2 houses, live in one, rent the other out, and they pretty much had a living wage before they'd even started. And then you have ULEZ zones. When they extended out to the North Circular, I sold something on eBay and a lady came to collect it. She was a Caribbean lady who lived 2 streets inside the North Circular. So when it extended out, she couldn't afford a car anymore and she had to come to me by taxi. This wasn't a poor woman, but it wasn't a wealthy woman. It was a woman who had to give up her car because Sadiq Khan was saving London from pollution. Did she vote for him? No, not after her quality of life was substantially impacted. But did ULEZ improve air quality? No. Quality of air on tubes is over 1,000 times worse. Yet the Mayor of London would like us to pay if we drive polluting cars on the surface, or pay him to take a very polluting underground train. My friend had to sell his car because he couldn't afford the £12 every day to go to work. Did he get a better car? Yes. But it was a lot more expensive and the one he sold was worth a lot less because of Sadiq Khan's money grab. London is, I believe, a city that's lost its soul. It's lost its essence. London's always been a melting pot of ethnicities. Any time that I've been here, you always had Brick Lane, you always had Temple Fortune, you always had Southall. You could find any flavour of food, any type of person. But London's become a city to no one. At the same time, whenever anything happens abroad, there's problems in London. There were riots in Suffolk between Sudanese and Eritreans. This is children who've grown up in the UK, who were fighting over things that happened back home in their parents' country. In Ilford, there were fights between Muslim and Hindus over a cricket game. There's rather colourful arguments when Bangladesh's government fell, and it needs to be protested on the streets of London. That's what diversity brought to London. You certainly wouldn't see that in Hong Kong. So I returned from Hong Kong. I'd say it was a melting pot. There's people from all round the world there. You don't have to look long to find people from Britain, Australia, and a dozen other European and Asian ethnicities. What I saw was different flavours, different perspectives on the same dish. This isn't like London, it was coherent. Now, you might not like everything that happens in Hong Kong, and I certainly would understand why some Hong Kongers would be up in arms at this point, but this isn't the politics in Hong Kong. This is about the experience of visiting the town of Hong Kong, a predominantly Chinese, homogeneous society, clean, respectful, well behaved, any criminality kept out of sight. It reminded me of the London of 30 years ago, but it does not remind me of the London today.